in this video we're going to take a look at lists in Python. Lists are a really useful and versatile feature of the Python programming language, and there's similar things in most other programming languages that aren't quite as easy to work with as they are in Python. But once we have the power of lists in our toolbox, we're going to be able to make much more interesting programs than we've done so far in this class. So pay close attention here. There's going to be a lot to take in this video. So you might have kind of already guessed what a list is by the name list, but I'm going to start out and just kind of motivate for you why we might want something like this and why it's useful. So for instance, maybe you want to store the name of every student in your class in variables in your program. So you could do this like we've been doing. You could say name1 equals Jessica, name2 equals Jennifer, and name3 equals Jack. And you can imagine like having lots and lots of names. You can have like name 50 equals Sam or something. And you could see already that this would be quite obnoxious. If you actually had 50 names here, this program would already be 50 lines long, and I really haven't even done anything yet. All I've done is put stuff in variables. So what we're going to do is use something called a list that adds a lot of flexibility, where we can store all of these names in one variable and just say, I want the first name in the list. I want the second name in the list from the one variable. So let's take a look at how you can do that. So instead of a bunch of different variables, I'm just going to have one variable. I'm going to call it names with an S. And then I'm going to use this square bracket notation. So let me see if I can zoom in on that a little bit for us. So I've got this square bracket here, and then I've got the first thing in the list. And then what I do to add another thing is put a comma after that, and then the next thing in the list. And then I'll do the same thing. I'll put a comma after that, and I'm just deleting what I had there before. And I'll just cut this last thing to put, I could put 50 or however many things I want in here. There's no limit. But in this case, I'm just going to do these 4 things to show you how this works. So I've got names, and now it's a list with 4 things in it. It's got Jessica as the first thing, Jennifer is the second thing, Jack's the third thing, and Sam is the fourth thing. Okay? And let me just show you how easy this is. So if I wanted to print out all of those, I could just say for name in names, print name. And let's just look at what this program does. We'll come back and I'll explain how all this, what I just wrote works later on in this video. I just want to show you like how simple this is, how nice it is. And that's it. Bam. Printed all those names with 3 lines of, I printed 4 names with 3 lines of code. Pretty nice, pretty slick. So for each name in that list of names, print the name. Okay, so that's kind of why we want to use these things. And you can imagine so many applications for this. So virtually any program that does something really interesting is going to use lists or another programming language's equivalent construct internally in some way. So you could, there's so many examples. So like scientific data, when you collect it, like you might be collecting a list of speeds that an object's moving towards or away from you with. You might like any website's going to have what's called a database with like a list of all of their users for the website. You could imagine Facebook and Twitter, they all have lists of users and lists of tweets and lists of passwords and all this stuff, okay? Because whenever there's a lot of data, it makes sense to put it in a list or something like a list, related to a list. You might have in math like a list of points to plot on a graph. You might have a list of all the files in a folder on your computer, or all the files on your computer in general, okay? So virtually any program, like I said, that does something complex or interesting is going to use lists internally somehow. We've already actually been using lists in this class, and you really didn't know it. So hidden here, so let's say, I'll just make a variable called A, and I'll say apple. So this is actually a list. It's just a list, and each entry in the list is a character. So for instance, in this list, A is the first entry, P is the second entry, the next P is the third entry, the L is the fourth entry, and the E is the fifth entry. So strings are actually just lists underneath. It's just a list of characters. And those characters, when all put together in order, make up a string. And in this case, it makes up the word apple. So we've really been using lists, whether or not you already knew it, in this class. But anyway, I'm going to start out a little simpler, and I'm just going to make a list of numbers. And let's play around with it to get an idea of what these can do. So if you're defining a list in like this way, like starting out a list, you always start out with a square bracket like that, okay? And then you add what you want in there. So I'm just going to make the list 1, 2, 3, 5. And that's going to be my list. It's got 4 things in it. Remember, I could keep going. I could add, more and more things if I wanted to. If I can type a comma successfully, that is. Okay, and, they don't have, I could add anything I want. And I could just keep going. And on and on and on. Lists can be as big as you want. But usually, you'll see we actually usually don't build them explicitly like this. We don't actually type out all the data. We either like get it from a web service or programmatically build it using loops. That'll all make sense. That'll all be clear soon. So anyway, here's what we've got. This is the list that I'm going to kind of guide you through how these things work with. All right, so what do we have here is a list, and it's got a length of 4. It's got 4 things in it. So for instance, I could print, and then I'm going to use the length, it's just len, the length function in Python. And I'm going to print it out. It's just going to tell me there's 4 things in the list. No surprise there, I hope. But there is one surprise coming up. So how you access a particular item in the list is by saying the variable name that stores the list, and then a square bracket, and then the position of the item that you want to access. So say I want the first item, and then a closing square bracket. So that's saying give me the first item in the list. But it's not actually the first item in the list. So let's look at it. Go ahead and make a prediction about what's going to happen when I run this program. And I'm going to run it, and to your surprise, possibly, I get the number 2. So, why is that? Well, it's kind of complicated. It has to do with the way that computers store information. So really, what you're storing here in this variable a, well, Python might do it a little different internally because Python's kind of a more high-level language. It's interpreted, which we're not going to get into. That's more of an advanced topic. But the basic idea is that there's memory. There's a memory location where the list of numbers begins. Like it starts at position 5, for instance, in the computer. And this number here is kind of telling it how much to go past that position to get to the next entry. Don't worry about that. Actually, that doesn't really matter. If you go study more computer science and other languages like C or C++, you'll have to worry about those kind of nitty-gritty details. But the nice thing about Python is you don't. All you need to know is that you start counting at 0. Okay, so if I run this again and I say a at 0, I'm going to get the 1. Okay, and if I say a at index, so that the way to read this is the list a at index 1 is the way to read this guy right here. Okay, so if I do this, I'm going to get the 2, and then if I go a at index 2, I'm going to get the 3, and if I go a at index 3, I'm going to get the 5, the last. So this is index 3. Okay, so let's go over that one more time kind of quickly. This thing here, the 1, that is position 0 in the list, okay? That's index 0. That thing there, the 2, that's index 1 in the list. That guy, the 3, is index 2, and the 5 is index 3, okay? So you basically all you have to remember here is you start counting at 0, okay? And that gives you the first, 0 gives you the first thing in the list. But there are, there's literally 1, 2, 3, 4 things in the list. So the length of the list is 4 items. There's 4 items in it, all right? So hopefully that's not too confusing. That's one thing that beginners can get a little caught up on. But once you understand like how a computer actually works inside, it makes a lot of sense why you start counting at 0, okay? So that's the idea. And yeah, all right. So now let's look at changing the values in a list. So for instance, and I could also just print a, and let's see what that looks like. So that's just going to print out the whole list, okay? So I'm going to leave that down here. I'm going to leave the print a down here, and I'm going to show you how to change a value in the list. So if we've got a and a at index 0, so right now that represents the 1. And then I update it to, let's say, -3. So how about I print a up here. So I've got a, I print out a, and then I say a at index 0 equals -3. So stop for a second, think about it, predict what will happen here, and see if you kind of are understanding what's going on. I'm going to go ahead and run it. And so it prints out initially the unedited list, and then I update the value of that's stored at index 0 to -3. So now it's no longer 1. The 1 is gone, and we've written -3 there instead. So that's what the new list is. Now, something really cool in Python that does not exist in other programming languages. Well, some it does, but most you'd have to do like a lot of work to get this to work. But here's the cool thing. You can put mixed types in here. So I can go like 3.7, and I can make this 5 like apple or whatever, okay? So this is really powerful. So I haven't remembered, this thing here is called an integer or an int. This thing here is called a string. This thing's called a floating point number, and this thing's also called a string. So this list has 3 different types of data in it. It's all mixed up. And that's a really useful feature. So I'll just show you that that works. And then once you start building more complex programs and work on problems involving lists, you'll understand like why that's so powerful. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time explaining that right now, but just so you know, you can mix data types like that, okay? All right, so now I'm going to go back to my example list just to keep it kind of simple here. Now I'm going to look at adding something to the list. So say I start out with a list like this, 1, 2, 3, 5, and I want to add like -7 at the end. So I actually can't say like a at index 4 equals -7. Okay, this is something it's not going to be happy about. It's going to say list assignment index out of range. So this list right now, it has a position 0, it has a position 1, it has a position 2, and it has a position 3. But it has no position 4 right now. So I can't say the list at position 4. That doesn't make any sense. And if you use lists in certain ways in your program, you'll get this sort of error if you ever try to access a position in the list that actually isn't valid, okay? So the way you actually do this is by using a function that the list has, and that function is called append. So you access that by saying the variable name, in this case a, and then the dot, like a period or a full stop, and then append, this first thing here, so dot append, and then in parentheses, the thing you want to append to the list, okay? And then I'll go ahead and print out A down here. And now we've got a list with 1, 2, 3, 5 in it. And then I say A.append. So append means add to the end, -7. And then I'll run this, and let's see what we get. We get 1, 2, 3, 5, -7. Okay, so I've appended that to the end of the list now. Let's take a look at some other things. So I'm going to go on the Python documentation here. And I could have gotten here by Googling like Python 3 lists or something. Let's just try that real quick. Python 3 lists. And yeah, that first result here in my case, well, I'm on Yahoo, but I'm sure it's the same on Google, is this page that I'm looking at. It's section 5, data structures. And these are all of the functions that lists have, okay? Most of these are not very hard to understand. So go ahead and take a look here if you want. I'm just going to look at a couple. So I looked at append, and insert could be useful, but I'm not going to spend that's a little bit more complicated, so you can look at that on your own if you want. I want to look at remove. So list.remove, so list means like whatever the name of your list is, .remove, and then an item. So let's give this a shot. So I said a.append -7, and then I'm going to say a.remove 2, or yeah, 2. And so predict what you think this should do. I think it shouldn't be too hard to guess what this is going to do, but let's just take a look. All right. So what it did was remove 2 from the list. All right. So first we added -7 to the end, and then we removed 2, and then this is the list we're left with, okay? But if I tried to remove, let's say, like 45 from the list, I'm probably going to get an error, right? Because there is no 45 in the list. And that's what happens. I get an error down here. It says a.remove value error, list.remove x. X is not in the list. In this case, x was 45, and this was the list. There's no 45 in there, so I can't remove it from the list, right? So that shouldn't be too surprising. Um, let's see. Yeah, one other. Like I said, feel free to just read this, learn as much about this as you want. Mostly, I'm interested in append, remove, and let's just take a look at sort as well. Okay. And if there's a more advanced version of this class, or maybe another video down the line, we'll talk about sorting and all the kinds of things, the different ways to sort things, which is actually a really fun and interesting problem to address, but for another time. So take a guess at what this will do, okay? Well, just wait a second, and I'm going to go ahead and run. Oh, I never took out the remove line, sorry. All right, now let's try. So a.sort sorts the list, and if you can actually tell it how you want it to sort it, but in this case, um, it just sorts it from lowest to highest. So the list was 1, 2, 3, 5, -7, and when I said sort, it put the -7 at the beginning because that's the smallest number. Let's use some other numbers, like kind of scrambled up, whatever they might be, and so on. Okay. So if I could have all this stuff and then I could run it. So it's kind of way out of order right now, all mixed up, right? Like 32, 5, 43, like all kinds of crazy numbers. But I run it and it sorts it for me, and I'm guaranteed to be lowest at this end. So -34 is apparently the smallest thing in the list, and then highest at this end. So 62,435 is apparently the biggest thing in the list. All right, so that's pretty useful. And again, just to remind you, if you want to get the length of a list, so I could say like b equals len, or that's short for length, of a. And then I could just print b. Or I could just print length of a directly, but I just want to show you, so it's clear, and this is on its own line, how to get the length. And that can be useful for a variety of reasons. So let's just run that, and we get 11 in this case. And how about if I did like b equals the length of apple? What do you think that would be? Because I said apple is a list, right? So let's see if that works. And it seems to work, right? So there's 5 things in this list. There's 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5. So it's a list of those characters, remember. And that's why the length of apple is 5. And the length of, whatever this string is, will be, let's see, 28. So apparently there's 28 characters there, okay? So that's just an example of how to use the len, or length function. All right, so for loops and lists are kind of made for each other. And I showed you an example of that at the beginning. So let me show you again how that looks. So I could say for, a lot of times we use the letter I for some reason. And then for I, or let's just say, let's do something else. So let's do like for num in a. And then I could print num. Okay, so this is going to go through the list. It's going to say, okay, here's a. Every time this loop executes, it goes through the next item in the list. So at the beginning, it starts out, it gives the variable num the value 32, and then does whatever's in the loop body. In this case, the only thing in the loop body is print num. And then it goes back to the beginning, goes to the next thing in the list, gives num that value, does the loop body. In this case, it just prints out the value again. And then it just keeps doing that until it gets to the end of the list. So this is really slick and pretty easy to use. So if you've got a list, you can go through every value in the list by saying for the name of some variable in that list, do whatever you want. And let's just take a look at that again. So that's going to print all those numbers in the list on each on their own line. You could, if you wanted to say, so let's say I had like a variable called total, and I made it start out at 0, and then I said like total equals total plus num, and then I could get print total down here. So what this is going to do, well, stop and think what it's going to do, and then I'll explain it. So it's going to add up all of the numbers in the list here, which is pretty nice, right? So it's going to say total equals total plus num. Each time through the loop, num is going to be the next thing in the list. So if I run this, and it'll tell me. Apparently that's what all those numbers added up is, right? And this number is like so much bigger than all of the other ones that it pretty much just stays around that value. And then there's actually some built-in fancy stuff um, in Python to do this for you. So you could say like total equals sum of a, like this. And it's actually kind of built into Python already to do stuff like adding up all the stuff in a list. But usually, I mean, you don't have to know all that, like all the built-in stuff. You can really just, it took what, 3 lines of code to do it myself versus knowing that there's a sum function built in that you can use. You can do it either way. Like, with all your programs, as long as it works, I don't really care how you do it. And this is probably like a smarter way to do it in reality. But point is, you don't really need to know all that stuff. Like, you don't need to know necessarily that there's a sum function built in. But a lot of times it's actually useful to go and if you're doing something a little bit more complicated than just adding up all the numbers in a list, it's useful to go out there and look online, look on Google, see if somebody already solved that problem beforehand for you, so you don't have to just waste your time solving a problem that's already been solved, basically. All right, so that was just a brief overview of lists, how they work, and how they're organized. The important things to remember: you define a list using the square brackets at the beginning and the end. Each item in the list is separated by commas. And to access the first item in the list, you use the name of the variable, so such as A. But let's just change the name of this so you don't think that all lists have to be called A. You could call this, jam if you want. You can call it, it's just a variable. You can call it whatever you want. So you say jam. To get the access to the first item, you do not start counting at 1. If you say jam at 1, at index 1, it's going to give you the 5 in this list. If you want to get the first item, you say jam at, not 32, at 0. And that's going to give you the 32, the first thing in the list, okay? And then the length of the list is just how many things there are in the list. So it's not the same as the last index. And there's lots of other cool stuff you can do. For instance, if I just wanted to get like, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I wanted to get from like here onward in the list, I could do something like this, which is pretty cool, but I just want to keep it simple in this video. But there's lots of cool, you'll see stuff in if you look at other people's code, you'll see stuff like this in programs. This is called list slicing, and we might come back to this in a later video. But it's pretty cool that like there's so much stuff in Python you can use to work with lists in really efficient and easy to understand ways. This is saying like, just give me from position 5 in the list all the way to the end, okay? So anyway, don't worry about that too much. Like I said, that's more an advanced topic. We'll come back to that if we have time. All right, as a closing thought here, I just want to point out that a major topic in computer science is actually this thing called data structures. So data structures define how information is represented in a computer's memory. Lists are a powerful data structure in Python, but how the data is actually organized internally inside the computer is quite complicated. We won't go into that much in this class, but an important aspect of designing applications that are efficient is choosing the correct data structures or way to represent information in your program for the task at hand. So in a more advanced class, you might learn about different data structures such as linked lists and hash tables and trees and priority queues and lots of other examples of data structures. So feel free to Google any of those terms if you want to learn more on your own. So the data structure linked lists, and I'll just type that out, linked lists. That would be a good place to start if you're interested in learning more about that on your own. But that's entirely optional, and it's definitely not required to understand how lists work in Python. All right, well, thanks a lot for your attention in this video. I know there was a lot of information here, so feel free to just kind of play with this stuff. Look at the documentation on the Python website. Just play around. You're not going to break anything. Worst case, like the worst thing you can absolutely do is have to restart your computer, which isn't that big of a deal. So just play around. Just have some fun. See if you can understand how all these things work. I know there's a lot taken in this video, but hopefully it wasn't too hard to understand, and I'll see you next time.